if you can't use it or it's difficult to use, you're not going to use it. And then it's just one more app on your phone.
No doubt you've heard the phrase, there's an app for that. Well, today, Dave Voth with Good Grazing Makes Cents joins us as we discuss a few of the apps that are available to us for grazing management.
We went through each app, giving them about an hour's worth of time to peek into it and see how user-friendly it is.
You'll join us for a practical conversation about grazing apps and also that one app/software that Dave says
it's an underrated tool, and so underrated it really didn't make it on our e-blast.
Find out what he's talking about and much more on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you here to the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, your host. Glad to have you joining us here on our program today. And not going to dilly-dally too much here at the front end with a lot of formalities, as we do have a lot to cover. But I did want to remind you that coming up later in the show, the Captain Tim O'Byrne, publisher of Working Ranch Magazine, will be in for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. And, of course, we'll hear from meteorologist Don Day with a look at our long-term weather. Oh, one other thing that's very helpful as well. If you like the program, pass it along to somebody that might find it intriguing to them as well. Also, leave comments or rating. That's helpful as well. Well, turning now towards our subject at hand here today, as we are looking at apps that can be used by ranchers like you and I, or ranch managers that's helpful to them. Now, I do want to say one thing before we get started in this. The discussion that we have about all the different apps or software that's out there, it's not by no means endorsing those. It's just a frank discussion between two guys that ranch or manage ranching operations as well, and I think you'll find the dialogue very important. So joining us on our program today is Mr. Dave Voth with Good Grazing Makes Cents initiative. Now, that's part of the Society for Range Management, and he also has his own company called Integrated Grazing Management out of Elko, Nevada. And Dave, I know you've been here on the program before. It's good to have you back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Thanks for having me, Justin. It's always a pleasure to be on here.
Dave, I reached out to you after I saw the e-blast come through from the Good Grazing Makes Cents from you all regarding different apps that you're reviewing and kind of looking at that, grazers or land managers, those kinds of things, ranchers like myself might find useful. And man, I went to that right away because really, as you kind of say in the phrase there's an app for that. And we really are starting to see a lot of apps, a lot of technology that can be integrated in our grazing management and just ranch management in general.
It's funny. Well, you put out content. You probably know how this goes. You never know what's going to hit and what's going to miss. I did not see this one going to hit the way it did. We got a lot of response immediately on that one.
Yeah. And I know just in the initial email that you've reviewed 3, we're going to talk about those here today. We'll get into that later on in the show, but there's also ones that you will be coming out with more information on that, and just maybe a plug for folks to get signed up for your guys' e-blast as well.
Yeah, we weren't planning on doing more of these, but we got such a good response that we're going to put out at least one more round of reviews. We don't have plans for any beyond that, but I imagine this is something we'll come back to once in a while because it's an ever-developing industry, this technology and agriculture. Agriculture is one of those industries where technology is really not being used to its full extent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's for sure. And I think there's a lot of practicality in what we're going to talk about here today. Now, before we jump into looking at some of the specific apps that you reviewed and ones that you're going to be continuing to look at later on, let's first talk about how did this kind of come together? Because I know you yourself as a ranch manager and also with your company, Integrated Grazing Management, that you saw, as we talked about just a little bit ago, you started to see a lot of this technology starting to come more to the forefront. So talk about how you looked at this and your method of evaluating these apps.
Yeah. So first of all, I want to say I'm not a tech guy, and I think that's why this has been kind of successful. It was about 8 years ago when I realized that not having any idea what was going on in the technology world was not really helping me, and so I started to learn a little bit about it, and it just, when it's done right, it can make your life so much more efficient and helpful. That being said, since so many producers are not tech wizards, we decided to approach this really from a producer standpoint. And we went through each app giving them about an hour's worth of time to peek into it and see how user friendly it is. Can you get rolling with this thing within an hour or not, was kind of our no-go on usability. Now, that being said, it is probably not fair to the folks who put this stuff out. 1 hour probably doesn't give you enough time to get into all the bells and whistles of it. And so I just want to make that disclaimer first and foremost, that this is mostly about the usability of it first, and then the functionality of it. If you can't use it, or it's difficult to use, you're not going to use it. And then it's just one more app on your phone that's just taking up space.
Yeah. Was there anything else from a standpoint in terms of, apps that you were looking at in terms of certain things that they were focused on? I know from Society for Range Management, there's a lot of range management elements that you all look at, but in general, what specifically were some things that kind of were captivating, that were the first choices for you to look at some of these apps? What was kind of the focus you were looking at?
So, using the Good Grazing Makes Cents model, we're really focused on how good range management can be profitable economically. That's kind of the lens we see everything through in this program. That being said, I was surprised at how different each of these apps are. And I found almost immediately that not one app is going to do everything I want it to do. Some are very focused on ecology. Some are very focused on the economics of it. A lot of them are focused on communication. So it's not really telling you something extremely important, but it's giving you important information that's easy to share with other folks. And without giving away too much, I really thought most of them were going to be like Pasture Map, where it's about grazing, time of grazing, when you're in pasture A and when you move to pasture B. And to me, that means you can focus on recovery time for grass. That's what I'm looking at most of the time, is that recovery time for grass. A surprise to see that not a lot of them were really like that. They might focus on recovery time just based on a spreadsheet, but Pasture Map was kind of the impetus for this. I was wondering how many of these are like Pasture Map, and I hadn't used Pasture Map before, but a few friends of mine had. They come at the ecology side from a lot of different angles, and I would say most of them are used for communication tools at their best. That's what they do really well. There's very few of these apps I found that a simple spreadsheet couldn't get you the same information. But if you send a spreadsheet to somebody in email, and you're lucky if it even gets looked at, let alone understood. And most of these apps do a really good job of communicating via pictures or graphics that show what's going on the rangeland.
Mm-hmm. Dave, I wanted to reemphasize something that you and I talked about off air, is that these apps are not to replace active management. That was something you said to me, and I think that's a pretty important thing to think about. They're tools, they're useful, but that doesn't necessarily mean you sit in the office and don't do anything.
Absolutely. And that's one of my concerns with these apps is you just can't take the place of active management. For example, the app might kick out that pasture A is going to get 30 days of recovery this year. If you don't know what 30 days of recovery does or means to your country, it's pretty useless. For example, in Elko, 30 days of recovery is not going to do much in a lot of pastures, but it might show up as looking good on an app. You've got to use some real common sense and study that art of range.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Dave, let's take a break here. And when we come back, we're going to continue on. Our focus of our program here today is looking at apps that might be useful from a ranch manager's point of view. A lot of us, maybe we're the owner, but we're still managing a ranch, and you might find some of these apps useful. Dave Voth is our guest today. He's reviewed a few of these. We're also going to talk about some others that he will be reviewing, and also ones that might come up just in conversation as well in our discussion here today. So be sure to tune in as we continue on here after the break. This segment today brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics. To find out more, go to their website at gelbvieh.org.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. You know what? We want our horses healthy year-round, but in these times of the year, I know for us here on our ranch, we're riding horses considerably more than we do maybe in those winter months. And there's more talk than ever about the importance of probiotics in equine health. But did you know that not all probiotics are created equal? The new Purina Systemic Supplement remains live and active after the pelleting process and then throughout the digestive system, making it all the way into that hind gut. Now, Systemic was designed to support normal recovery after exercise and then that occasional gastrointestinal stress. Whether you're using a probiotic now or not, it's time to use a live and active supplement from a name you trust. Check it out, the new Purina Systemic Probiotic. Well, as we turn now back to our program at hand, joining us on our program today is Mr. Dave Voth with the Society for Range Management's initiative, Good Grazing Makes Cents. He's out of Elko, Nevada. And when it talks about, if you want to talk to folks that really need to know how to do pasture management, it's going to be folks in those more arid climates. And they really start to understand that. And it's very useful, even if you're in a climate with a lot more precipitation. Boy, you can advance your ability in carrying capacity and soil management just by taking these same principles or apps or things that we're going to be talking about here today. Dave, the e-blasts that really caught a lot of folks' attention that we referenced in the last segment started looking at 3 specific apps that could be used for producers out there. However, before we start looking at those, there is kind of one universal app or program software that really kind of supersedes a lot of this because it is so useful, and that would be Google Earth.
It's an underrated tool and so underrated it really didn't make it on our e-blast because it's ubiquitous. And I can say I don't do any of these apps without first plugging it into Google Earth. I have my pastures lined out, my water lines, fences, everything in Google Earth first. And it's solid. Google Earth is not going anywhere. It's very user friendly, and it makes it super easy to save those images, save those shape files, and then plug them into an app from there. And we'll probably get into that a little bit later, but I use Google Earth as the base for all my mapping, even with like ArcGIS kind of stuff, which is really higher end. And I'm just kind of flirting with understanding ArcGIS, but I don't do any of that stuff without first putting it into Google Earth. It's a way to wrap your head around it first, save it, know where it's at, and then plug it in and start doing some cooler stuff with it. Because Google Earth is not meant for agriculture or pasture management, but it's a great mapping tool that you just can't beat.
Yeah. Dave, I have used it, as you said, there for pasture mapping, and of course with the multiple layers that you can turn on or off with that, and literally through the use of a check mark on that you can have a lot of different scenarios. You know, a lot of people's places might have BLM land or Forest Service land, and you can turn those on and off and those kinds of things. One of the things that's also been very useful that I've found is planning out water lines. And talk a little bit about that and how that can be used.
Absolutely. So it probably goes everywhere, but pasture management doesn't mean anything if you don't have water management first. Google Earth is the same thing, just my go-to place. I can test out where I would want to put it, measure the distance between this new water and the last water, measure elevation changes between them so you know how many breathers to put in or if that's even a viable spot to put a water line. One thing I would say, especially in Nevada where we have so much public land that I haven't found useful in Google Earth is land ownership.
Yeah.
That gets a little tricky because obviously we can't just put a pipeline right through BLM land. So I go back and forth between Onyx and Google Earth. Onyx, I think, is great it does a much better job of showing land ownership right down to the specific owner. But in terms of using Google Earth to plan out water lines, that same thing. First place I go is Google Earth. Same with fences. I put a lot of imaginary fences on Google Earth. If I had as many fences actually built as I put on Google Earth, I'd be more than broke from buying wire.
Yeah. Dave, a hack that I have used on Google Earth that is always useful, and you can pay for this as well, but if you want just a temporary use of it, is kind of knowing where townships and section lines are at. And what available hack on that? There's one I know, but if you know it, then I was going to let you visit it and talk about it.
I'm interested to hear your hack. I do know a way, but it's so complicated that I have to Google it on one screen and do it on the other screen as I'm doing it. So if you have an easier one, I'd love to hear that. So
what I do is if you go to the website earthpoint.us, and you can download a KML file, which is what Google Earth's files are, is KML files. You can download a file that activates and shows on your Google Earth section lines, townships, all those kinds of that information. Now you can buy a subscription to that, and it will give you, and you will have that forever. You can have that forever, or it'll give you a file that has only so many click-throughs. And usually, for me, in the course of a day of working through on something, I never go through all of those. But it gives you all your information for that, and that's really helpful, especially if you want to start mapping out ownerships or things like that are based on 40s. Which a lot of times they are. I mean, sometimes you might have an obscure ownership line, but for the most part, a lot of times in these big range outfits, it's based on 40s. And so that's what I found to be very useful in Google Earth to help you kind of get some of that stuff laid out. Because a lot of times, I mean, we kind of know, well, I know there's a marker there, so where does that fit on my deal? So your thoughts on that?
That's a really handy hack. I usually upload a shapefile into ArcGIS, which is a paid-for subscription and it's pretty expensive, then save it as a KML. I really like the way you're talking about doing it. That kind of leads into something else we're going to talk about is saving KMLs. And I remember the first time I was in a meeting and people were talking about KMLs and KMZs and shapefiles, and I checked out immediately. I didn't know what they were talking about. And I just sat through the rest of the meeting. It was a couple hours meeting, and I don't know what these guys are talking about, whatever. So I learned a little bit about that, and it is shockingly easy to save things as KMLs or KMZs, especially if you have any kind of handle on Google Earth. Most of these apps we're going to talk about, you can draw out your polygon or the shape of your field or whatever you want. But as you're drawing it, you're never going to capture it exactly. You're going to be feet or even miles off when you're clicking to draw. If you can, it's probably the first thing I would learn how to do is to save as a KML or a KMZ, so you could just upload it into any app. So you're comparing apples to apples across the board. It would save that same shape, the shape of your field, and plug it into various apps. Because one of the things I found is that, and I think we talked about this, not one of these apps can do everything that I want it to do. It's kind of like a Swiss Army knife. Swiss Army knife doesn't have a great toothpick, but sometimes it works. Yeah. Same with the scissors on it. The more things an app is going to try and do, the less well it does everything. So I have found that there's not one app there's some that are my go-to for certain things, but I have to have several of them to get everything I want out of them. Yeah.
And that's a good point. And that ability to get into those. I think as you said there, if we can get familiar with Google Earth, because not only do some of these other apps use it, but there's also other folks in our business. Maybe we're planning out an irrigation system. Maybe we're going to the NRCS office. Different things like that. You're applying for an EQIP grant through USDA. A lot of this stuff can be integrated in that. So I think first and foremost, understanding Google Earth is very, very helpful, understanding the KML files, and then we can start now looking at these apps. We're going to take a break here, and when we come back, we're going to jump into this. I keep promising we're going to talk about apps, but I had forgot when we went to the last segment that we really did need to talk about Google Earth, and Dave reminded me about that as we were on break there. We need to talk about that, and that's true. I think you're going to find a lot of value in there. One other hack before we go to break. Dave, did you know there's a game in Google Earth? Are you aware of that? They're not a game, but there's another. There is a flight simulator in Google Earth. Did you know?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
So I've crashed many, many times. You can fly over your land, pretend you're shooting coyotes. So, Dave, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we will jump in. I promise we'll get into looking at some of these apps they've reviewed, what Dave has reviewed, as well as discussion about some other ones as well. We're going to take a break here. But while we take a break, why don't you head to the coffee pot and refill? That's what I'm going to do. I've got a pot of Cowpuncher coffee brewed up. It's what I've been working on here this morning. And if you're looking for a new brand of coffee, why don't you give them a try? Cowpuncher Coffee. They've got a lot of different varieties and flavors you can check out. Give Jim or Tricia Williams a call or check them out online. Go to their website at cowpunchercoffee.com. Grab a mug and let's spur the day with Cowpuncher Coffee. You know, the world of agriculture real estate has literally exploded. And what you find out there is a lot of companies that look at your land kind of like a piece of fresh meat and really can provide no other options but just to sell your asset. But to ranch families, it's more than an asset. It's been your family's way of life for many, many years, and it's your heritage. And if you're looking at some changes, wouldn't you like to just sit across the table at least once with someone that could provide you with some multiple options about the possible future of your asset? Back in 1946, when Henry Wall and his son Warren founded Hall Mortgage Company, they built relationships with hardworking ranchers all across the country by providing solid and trusting advice that was guided by a principle of integrity. Now, today, we know them as Hall & Hall, and nothing has changed with how they work with folks. Now, while selling might be what you've been considering, have you thought about all your options? At Hall & Hall, they're multifaceted in their ability to not only broker real estate throughout the United States and Canada and or provide long-term financing for buyers, but also appraisals, brokerage, or auction services for landowners. But yet, at the end of it, they still do have a very strong desire to see land stay in production agriculture. Now, whether it's the current ranch family owners or maybe new buyers, Hall & Hall can assist with day-to-day operations to hiring or even lease negotiations. You know, and here's another thing. In Hall & Hall, they have folks all across the country, which means you can work with someone that knows your country and understands your type of operation. Since 1946, Hall & Hall has been dedicated to the land and landowners. And if you're at a point where you're ready to sit down and maybe consider some changes and talk about the future of your land asset, or maybe just brainstorm some options, encourage you to reach out to the folks at Hall & Hall. You can go to their website to find out more information at hallandhall.com. Well, as we get back to our program here today, joining us on the program is Dave Voth with the Good Grazing Makes Cents initiative. That is part of the Society for Range Management. He is out of Elko, Nevada, but we are looking today at apps, the technology, the use that we can find in our management of our grazing, of our ranching operations. And Dave, we've already kind of set the table here in terms of talking about how you came through and went through these evaluations and method of evaluating. The last segment we talked about really fundamentally, maybe one of the first things is to understand is the utilization of Google Earth. It's a software that is a free download that you can download on your computer, or you can also get the app on your phone as well. All right, so let's jump into the first one, Dave. First app that you have in your review. Let you get started on that.
The first one we did was OnX, and OnX, for those listening, it's ONX. It is a hunting app. And it's certainly not meant for agriculture use, but I find it invaluable. I use it several times per week. Since it's not made for agriculture use, you have to take some of the things with a grain of salt, but I find their applications invaluable in my everyday management. Biggest thing I would say is that it shows land ownership, and especially when you're dealing with public lands, knowing where that public land is, where BLM is incredibly valuable in knowing how to lay out a pipeline, where you can fence, where you can't fence. If it's going to take a NEPA to put a fence up, it might be worth going a mile around that area to avoid going through the NEPA process. Same with the water line. OnX, the other thing about it is it's probably one of the most ubiquitous apps out there. The biggest thing I find with it is, since so many people have it, it's really easy to just drop a pin and say, hey, there's a break in the fence over here. There's a cow on the road somewhere around here. Somebody saw it. And a lot of people have this app, especially in rural Nevada. And I imagine that's the same for a lot of other listeners out there. There's a lot of hunters out there. So it's not uncommon for people to have OnX and just be able to send you a pin. If I get a call, there's a cow on the road, first thing I ask for is, can you send me a pin?
Yeah.
So I'm not chasing a ghost 10 miles up the road. That's probably the best part of OnX is how many people have it and how easy it is to share a single pin or a small amount of data that you can go out and fix whatever the immediate problem is. Since it's so ubiquitous, laying out a fence line for contractors or pipeline or things like that, here is exactly where I want it. And OnX, I think, you can get it down to within meters for accuracy. It's incredible. Prior to using these kind of tools, if you were just to hand somebody a sheet of paper, I don't want a fence here, it's kind of a crapshoot whether it's going to be in the right place or not. And if as expensive as fences and pipelines are, you want it exactly where you want it.
Yeah. Real quick, this does have some correlation and tie back to Google Earth as well, because you can export information out of OnX. There's kind of can get a little bit complicated, but it is possible to export pin drops, maps, or your tracking, or points that you want to waypoints that you want to mark. You can take those and export those back into Google Earth, can't you?
You can, absolutely. And there's two ways of doing it. You can export it back to Google Earth. Like you're saying, the thing I really love about it is you can just text a pin to somebody. Mm-hmm. It's as easy as that, export, and then it'll pop up, send it as a message. And I just put Justin Mills, and you can know exactly where that pin is just based off a text. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can get it back into Google Earth, and it's complicated enough. I don't do it very often. Yeah. I usually go the other way from Google Earth out to OnX.
Okay. Just a couple other real quick things. It does require cellular activity if you're going to be live. Now, you can download maps to your phone, offline maps, so that if you get into an area that does not have cell coverage, you still have access to maps. But that'd be one thing to keep in mind, correct?
And it works. It works when you're out of cell service. As long as you've downloaded the map first, it works incredibly well outside of service. And that's probably one of the biggest pluses for me. Most of us are working in places where there's no cell service. It doesn't take much to download those maps, and you can download, kind of a poor version of your map and get like I think it's 10 by 10 miles wide. I do that all the time. Just download a huge swath of area and know that I'm going to be around there somewhere.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's move on to the second one, and the one you want to get into, Pasture Map. I know you talked a little bit about it already a bit, but let's talk about that.
Pasture Map was kind of what I thought all these were going to be like. Pasture Map is I mean, obviously it's in the name. It is made for pasture use. It's a great tool, kind of like we were saying before, for communication. It captures a lot of the things that are important to grazing management, but you still have to know the context for that. We talked earlier about recovery periods for grass, and it will tell you can plan out your recovery periods. You still have to know what your production's like. You still have to know what adequate recovery is like in your area. So it leaves me a little concerned that people might use it as a crutch. You still have to know a tremendous amount about rangeland to use it well. Mm-hmm. That being said, if you're even thinking about recovery time for grass, you're in a much better situation than a lot of folks. Mm-hmm. If we're planning our grazing, that's step one. And Pasture Map makes that part really easy. It is probably my favorite part about it is the communication part of it. I don't think that there's anything, I didn't find anything mind-blowing about Pasture Map in terms of what it calculates, mm-hmm. but it does a really good job of allowing you to share that information with the ranch team, with landlords, with anybody on what your management is doing. So that's where I really find Pasture Map to be exceptional. It's made for this kind of stuff, and it's made to communicate that information. That being said, it's not going to do everything. It's a little more of a Swiss Army knife than the others mm-hmm. for ag producers, but it's not going to do everything I need it to do.
Mm-hmm. Is there a cost on Pasture Map? I know it's a range. I'm sure there's a range in terms of what all you want to utilize in that. What's your comments on the cost?
Similar pricing. I think it was $30, something like that. Same thing. Well worth the money. If it's $30 a year, that's money well spent. If nothing else, if it makes you think about planning your grazing, that's worth $30. Anything above that is gravy to me. Okay.
All right. Let's go to our third one here, and it's titled Grazing Calculator. Talk about it.
Yeah. So this one came up. It costs $1.99. It's a very simple app. This is one of those ones that's better as a spreadsheet. And I don't take away from anybody who built these apps. I helped create an app one time, and I know the kind of frustration that goes into it. This is one of those ones that it does the math for you pretty quickly, and that's about all. That was really all I found. Is it does some quick grazing math for you. Nothing a simple spreadsheet couldn't do, and that's fine to me if you want to use something that's going to do quick math for you. But I really caution people to understand the math before they start using shortcuts for it. One, you just if you don't know what your inputs are, those outputs are going to be garbage too. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, and this leads to my overcomplicated spreadsheets, when I start thinking about some math, and it leads me to start thinking about other things, and I think rabbit trails are fantastic when you're talking about rangeland management. It's those rabbit trails that lead me to come up with better ideas or just some new ways of thinking when I'm doing the math behind it, doing the legwork. That kind of time is time well spent.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's take another break here. And when we come back, we've got one more segment with Dave Voth as we are looking at some apps that are useful for ranch managers. We're going to just highlight a few other ones that he has considered or looked at, really not the detail of discussion in them that we just had on the previous ones, but I think they're ones to mention. We'll talk about that as well as hear some final comments from him as we look at how we can implement this type of technology in our ranching operations. This segment today brought to you by K-Line Irrigation, a cost-effective adaptive irrigation solution designed specifically with the grass-based livestock producer in mind. To find out more, you can head to their website at k-linena.com.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
You know, during these hot, dry parts of the summer, keeping a pretty keen eye on your water situation is important. And I know I'm not the only ranching operation in the same boat there, but what we have been using the last several years is Tank Toad. Their remote water monitoring system works great from the convenience right there on my phone, powered by solar, satellite, or cell. I can keep an eye on my water supply in my cistern tanks with a daily text message. If you'd like to find out more information, you can go to their website at tanktoad.com, or you can call Meadowlark Solutions today. Check out all of that, what they've got available, from tank monitors to well controllers, generators, the ability to turn your electric fence on and off from a remote location. Give them a call at 801-252-6135. Well, as we continue on now and wrap up our discussion here today with our final segment with Dave Voth, he is with the Good Grazing Makes Cents initiative for the Society for Range Management. Always appreciate your guys' content and effort to educate producers like myself about good pasture management. It's something that is very critical as we continue to move forward in ranching, just not only to be sustainable, but to continue on. Sustainability, as I was talking with Alan Williams a couple of podcasts ago, it was kind of a word he figured that's just kind of maintaining. We don't want to maintain. We want to do better than maintain. And I think that's where Society for Range Management is really trying to push producers into that. As we are talking today about some of the different apps and software and technology that can be used through your phones or through your computer, we've reviewed 3 in the last segment. And Dave, as we kind of wrap up our conversation today, I know you guys have another e-blast coming out that you have more reviews. And let's just talk briefly about what some of those apps that you're going to be looking at in the next e-blast.
Yeah, so we weren't planning on a second e-blast, but based on the feedback, we're going to do at least one more. And there's some I'm really excited about. There's Stock Smart, which is not a phone app yet. It's on the computer. I started fooling around with it just yesterday. I didn't even put my full hour into it, and I was already excited about it. Mm-hmm. The Maya Grazing app is another one we're gonna review a little bit on that one. I tried to review it already. I found some difficulty in logging in, and the big thing to me is usability on these things. If you're not going to use it, if it's too much of a hassle, then it's more of a hindrance than anything. I'm really excited about the content of it, but I'm a little concerned about the usability of it. Talking with some folks at AgriWeb coming up, which is a little less of an app and more of a service, and trying not to get into too much of that, but I had a really good meeting with them and learned their product. I'm really excited to review that one and get back to everybody. You talked about sustainability, and a lot of times SRM gets kind of lumped in on just the ecology side, and Good Grazing Makes Sense is really about how that ecological sustainability, or better than sustainability, it doesn't matter if it's not financially stable. It's all these things need to be tied back to being economically profitable. So when we talk about that sustainability piece, I just want to make sure even the Society for Range Management, which is focused on the ecology piece, is also focused on the bottom line of ranchers. Mm-hmm. If ranchers are going out of business, somebody's got to manage that land. And that's what Society for Range Management is all about, is managing that landscape. And all these things are directly tied into your profitability. These tools to help you line out fences, line out water lines, they're also saving you incredible amounts of money. If you can save a mile of fence, if you can save a mile of pipe, it's just something we're always thinking about, is the economic factors behind ranching.
Yeah.
And then in turn, land management.
Well, Dave, as you talk about that, one of the things that I feel sometimes is I don't want people to interpret when I say, as you know, and you listen to the show here, I push a lot about being profitable as a ranching operation. And I realize that ranchers that are probably listening understand, but let's say I just had somebody that's maybe not as familiar with ranching listen, and we keep pounding the fact of profitability, and they take it the wrong way. They take it as if, well, we're just out here to squeeze every dime out of something and really not take care of anything. And I think that is the furthest from the truth. I think in order to be highly profitable, you have to be a good steward of the resources you have. And I just don't want that to be misunderstood. And I think that's what you're saying here. We're being efficient with our tools. We got some tools, but at the end of the day, we've got to be profitable. Being profitable means we're good stewards.
Absolutely. Among producers, there's always this kind of badge of honor for being broke or working 80 hours a day. And that's just not a sustainable way of thinking. Being profitable means more than just staying in business and passing on a bad business to the next generation. If your business isn't truly economically profitable, turning a profit every year that you can invest in, that's not a great way to manage land. That's definitely not sustainable, and it's certainly not something you want to pass on to the next generation. A millstone around the next generation's neck. You're burdened now with managing this land the best way you can. Nobody wants that.
Yeah.
Everybody wants a happy family that's making a decent living with time enough to spend with your family while actively managing the landscape in a way that I think we're meant to do.
Yeah, that's a very good way to say that. Just some other apps that I know you mentioned real quickly. We're not going to go into full details of them, but I know you just made mention of some of those. There was like 5 of those: Plant ID, Cow Poop Analyzer, range photo monitoring, cattle record keeping with Cattle Max, Cattle Market Mobile. Just some brief comments about some of those apps or just in general what you're finding.
Yeah, so, kind of like that Swiss Army knife, the cow pooping app or whatever it is, that's very specific and probably not something I'm going to use every day, but they're fun. To me, more just a way to learn from. The marketing side of things, there's a lot more of those that we really didn't get too much into because there's so many of them. We work a lot with Beef Basis. That's one of my favorites. We do a lot of presentations together on that one. But the marketing side of things that's just kind of a different world that we haven't gotten into yet. I think it's worth getting into, maybe as its own separate thing, just focused on marketing.
Yeah.
I'm surprised we went into this with the focus on pasture and range management, and all of a sudden we're talking about lots of different things with lots of different apps. Marketing it's just different enough. I think it deserves its own segment.
Yeah. I want to go back to one other thing. You mentioned here Plant ID app, but I know you can find some apps that are maybe a little bit more state specific. I know I've got one for more of the Western rangelands or for what I see here in Wyoming. So I know a Plant ID app for your phone, that's a pretty valuable resource as well. And I find myself using that from time to time.
I use it quite a bit. I do quite a bit of monitoring. So especially if I'm in a new area, those Plant ID apps are incredibly helpful. And I think you hit the nail on the head. It's when you get into state specific ones, I use it probably as a crutch more than I should. But I love those Plant ID apps. I think they're just fun, if nothing else.
Yeah. What's very helpful, if you don't want to use an app, just hire your son that's out of college or in college, going through a range class, or an FFA kid that's just been in range camp, coming out of range camp and does range judging. Those kids, they know their plants.
Yeah. Or just find a plant nerd. Plant nerds always love to ID stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, Dave, a great conversation. Before we go, though, just some final wrap up from you about this as we look at these tools. Just some final comments from you about what we've talked about here today.
Yeah. One of the biggest things is don't be afraid to mess it up. Some of the best advice I got was from my wife when I was getting frustrated with technology. And she told me, you don't know enough about computers to permanently break it. And it's so true. I don't know enough about computers to really break the whole thing unless I throw it across the room. So don't be afraid to press some buttons and try things out. You can always delete it and try again. Definitely don't be afraid to learn how to save those images, those polygons as a KML or a shapefile. That's probably the first step to any of these things. I was getting into StockSmart the other day. The first thing it asked for was you could draw it or you could import a KML. And I put it away until I could get back to a KML to drag in there. That makes life so much easier on any of these apps is if you know how to save as a KML, KMZ, shapefile, any of those things. Also basic spreadsheet stuff. If you don't want to have a lot of apps, just take a small amount of time to get into Excel or even Google Sheets. Just do some basic math on those things. I don't want anybody to avoid getting any of these apps, but you can save a lot of time by just having some real basic spreadsheet knowledge.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, Dave, before we go here too, we keep referencing the fact that you guys do send out e-blasts through the Good Grazing Makes Cents initiative. And let's just really quickly talk about if folks are really wanting to get into more pasture management resources, how can they do that?
So broadly, just check out SRM, Society for Range Management. It is filled. It's a lot of academics. It's a lot of agency folks, but we're getting more producers involved. I would check out SRM, Society for Range Management first. If you're more interested in just this economic and ecology combination, that's what Good Grazing Makes Cents is here for. It's part of SRM. I tell people a lot of times that when I first found Society for Range Management as a producer, I was intimidated. I don't operate at this level.
Yeah.
It is for everybody. There's a level for everybody, and nobody walks out of there with less information, less knowledge than when they came in.
Yep, that's for sure. So what's the website for folks to go in and even to get signed up for if they want to get these newsletters?
Goodgrazing.org.
Okay. Perfect. Simple. Goodgrazing.org is where you can do that. Dave, thanks for joining us. Very useful information. Looking forward to the next e-blast coming out on that. I think it's very practical information, and I appreciate your guys' effort in doing this.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
You bet. And again, Dave Voth has been my guest here today. Just a couple websites that he threw out there that I want to remind you about. Again, goodgrazing.org was the website we were just talking about a little bit ago, but also you mentioned Society for Range Management. Their website is rangelands.org. And you might also put on your calendar February 9th through the 13th will be the Society for Range Management's annual meeting in Spokane, Washington. Stay with us. When we come back, Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and we'll hear from meteorologist Don Day on our long-term weather.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the WeatherStationExperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit MeasureRain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to MeasureRain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Radio Land. Speaking to you from my studio here in the Nevada Southwest Desert. Monsoon, thunder, lightning, all kinds of flash flooding and good moisture. Hope you guys are having a good week. The desert sure needed this monsoon, I'll tell you that much. Check out the summer issue, Working Ranch Magazine, page 103, Life of an Ag Teacher. This is written by an ag teacher, Joe Tyus. He submitted this great letter. To my students, as I drove home this evening from school, I was reflecting on my year as an agriculture science teacher. The sun slipping lower was painting the western sky, and I sensed a peaceful satisfaction wash over me as I drove my truck home. It had been a long day. We had our regular school duties, taking kids on a college visit, then loading a sick pig and taking it to the vet for a student. After getting the student's animal settled and grabbing a quick bite to eat, I ran by my place to check on a very pregnant heifer who I'm hoping doesn't need assistance in the days to come. I don't remember the early mornings and late nights with my FFA kids as challenges, struggles, or inconveniences, but as beautiful opportunities to pour into the lives of these kids. My heart desires to help them grow into the people they are meant to become. As we have long truck rides and pancake suppers, we have times of great laughter, meaningful talks, and interesting conversations. That is the joy of being an agriculture teacher. We get to be around kids apart from the classroom, and it is in those moments that we get to speak life, encouragement, and caution to our students. Sure, we give advice, but I've learned to ask if I can dad them, meaning I'm going to talk to them like you are my own child and give you some advice. I hope they listen. Oftentimes they do. I let them know how much they mean to me and that I only want the very best for them. So that's what it's like to be an agriculture teacher. Early mornings, late nights, dusty hog pens with the beautiful opportunities to speak life and encouragement into teenagers. Recently, I had one of my students ask me what I would like to have for a present. I looked confused, and she told me, I want to get you something to tell you thank you for everything you've done for me. The fact that she wanted to give me a present to say thank you was enough, but I told her what I wanted. At graduation, after you've walked across the stage, the fireworks have gone off and the caps have been thrown, find me. With a tear in my eye, we'll take a selfie before we send you out into this world to make it a better place. That is the gift I requested, a selfie on the graduation field. I explained to her this is what teachers do. We invest in students. We guide them, we love them, we fuss at them, and encourage them to move boldly along life's path. One of the greatest gifts I've ever received from a student was handed to me in the grocery store produce aisle. A former student came up to me and said, "Do you remember me?" I did, and he said these words that are etched in my teacher's heart. "Do you remember that time when you told me you were going to talk to me like I was your kid?" I told him, "Yes, I remember." Then he looked me eye to eye behind the bearded face and said, "I heard you, and thank you." There is no greater gift for a teacher than to have a student say that. So graduation is coming upon us soon, and I will cheer from the stands again as my kids walk across the stage. It is a bittersweet day because I've come to love these kids, from awkward freshmen to now seniors stepping out into this big world to find their way. Some will find me, and with the tear in their eye, will take a selfie. Later that summer, after a short rest, we will load up the ag truck and take the new crop of FFA officers to the state convention, and we will start the process all over again. Your teacher, Joe Tyus. Thank you, Joe, for that, and God bless all our ag students and teachers. May you have a great year. Back to you, Justin.
Well, Captain, thanks for sharing that letter. I think that really does embody the heart of those ag teachers out there that really do have such a big impact on the lives of their students and their FFA members. I know, speaking on behalf of a former ag student in high school and an FFA member, it was my ag teachers that really were very impactful, my FFA advisors and state advisor that had a huge impact on shaping who I am here today. So we wish them the very best as well as they get prepared for yet another year ahead of them. Well, as we turn now and take a look at our long-term weather, joining us as he does each and every week is meteorologist Don Day. And Don, you and I were joking just a little bit before we went on air as we look ahead of what we're anticipating this coming week and the weeks out here for weather. Should we just record the weather and put it on loop for the next few weeks? You know, hot in the west, cold in the east.
Yeah, this time of year, you tend to get a pattern that will kind of get stagnant, not change very much. And you expect that midsummer. You kind of get into that, call it the summer doldrums, where you are is where you're likely going to be over the next 3 or 4 weeks. And, you know, you mentioned warm in the west and cool in the east. And that's really something here over the next week we're going to see. Temperatures are actually in the Corn Belt, the Midwest, the Great Lakes, and the east we'll actually see temperatures below average, well below average, while we have some very warm weather in the far west. There's going to be an area of heat that's going to extend from the southwest United States through California, the Pacific Northwest, the Great Basin states up into British Columbia and Alberta and Saskatchewan. Then you go to the other side of North America, from eastern Canada, from east of the Mississippi, then even down into Mexico. Those areas are going to be a little bit cooler. So there's going to be a contrast west to east across the nation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so something that we have not talked about for a while yet, and that is the temperature of the water out in the Pacific that brings in the El Niños, La Niñas. Where are we at in that cycle right now?
Well, very interesting that you brought that up because we've had the latest update, the update that we get once a month from the folks who track La Niñas and El Niños. They came out with their latest forecast, and it looks like the La Niña, while it is going to be strengthening between now and probably up till October, November, it's not looking as strong now. And it looks like it may be completely fading right around the first of the year. And this La Niña may not last as long as the previous El Nino, which lasted about a year. This La Niña looks like it's going to last about a year, and we might even be looking at a weak El Nino by next spring. That is good news for especially parts of the western and central United States and the southwest United States that are dry. Because if we don't see the La Niña stay through the winter and into next spring, that's a pattern that looks a little bit more wet. Also, if we see the La Niña reaching its peak this fall and fading by, let's say, December or January, that's a cold signal potentially for a lot of the North American continent. A lot of the especially the northern and central U.S., central and northern areas of Canada. It's kind of a situation, Justin, where if the La Niña isn't going to be as strong and fades quicker, that's going to play a really big role in how the winter is going to unfold.
Okay. Good insight for now, because I know for a lot of us, and myself included, I'm looking at those winter months and trying to figure out, okay, what do we need for protein coming in? We try to get through as much as we can on grass, but do I need to set the hay pile up a little bit better this year? So I think that's good information going forward.
Yeah, we're going to keep a close eye at it because historically, sometimes we talk about the solar cycle and how that may impact these La Niña and El Nino cycles, as there tends to be some correlation. We're nearing our solar maximum, and when you're near that, you tend to alternate between these short-lived El Niños and La Niñas. And historically, when you transition from that La Niña to El Nino, especially during the winter months, that sometimes does result in some colder than average winters in some parts of the U.S. Not saying it's going to happen yet, but here we are in July. As we get into late August, early September, we'll start to get that better into focus. But that's something that, to your point, we need to focus in on as we get to the end of the summer and early fall.
You bet. All right. Well, Don, appreciate the insight here for today's long-term weather. We'll talk to you next week.
See you then.
And if you want to tune in each and every morning with meteorologist Don Day and find out what he's seeing for weather across the country, you can find a link to his YouTube channel by going to his website at dayweather.com. Coming back, we'll talk about what's in store for next week's edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Well, if you heard something here today and you have questions about it for either myself or Dave Voth, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. You can find his contact information by going to their website at goodgrazing.org, or you can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. Next week, Galen Garish with American Grazing Lands will be joining us as they sell an awful lot of fencing product to folks all across the country. And if you've been considering putting in permanent or portable electric fence, or maybe you've already been doing it, but you're wanting to know what's the best products out there that they're finding other producers are using and having good luck with, we're going to talk about it on next week's show. Well, the Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. If you want to get your subscription started, you can go to workingranchmag.com. Thanks to our sponsors today, K-Line Irrigation, the American Gelbvieh Association, Hall & Hall, Cowpuncher Coffee, and Tank Toad. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Justin Mills. And until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.